I wanted to share with you how I do a sculpt, or at least how I start it. Exclusively over the past, I guess 10 years, I've done sculpts only on Tonner male bodies. And a Tonner male body is a 17-inch, approximately a quarter scale of human. And it has a neck bob that moves around. And I had to figure out how to make a sculpted head stay on here. So if you look at the inside of a Tonner head, as you can see, the hole is much smaller than the neck bob. And this you can heat, and when you heat it, it stretches enough and gets mushy enough that you can get it on here, and it will pop, this bud will pop inside this hole. And then as it cools, the hole will shrink back down again. But since I'm making a polymer head clay and it doesn't have any flexibility and you can't heat it, I had to make it so that the head will fit directly onto this neck bob without having to go through a smaller hole. It has to go through a hole that's the same size as the neck bud. So rather than, like I said, since I exclusively do Tonner dolls, rather than have to do it at the same time every time, I wanted to make a casting, a mold of this so that I can always start with the right size neck hole and neck bob. So what I do is I took this is a mat head, and I have these, you can get, it's a two-part silicone molding material. Aero Marine has one, Polyplastics is a lot cheaper, and it's two parts. It's a 1-to-1 mixture of A and B, and you take out the pretty gooey, well, that's the white one. It doesn't show up very well. That's usually two parts so that you can see when you mix it. And you take out a bowl of that, half of what you think you need, and then take out the exact same amount from the other. And you keep kneading it until it's a uniform color. And you have about, you have a few minutes, I think 15 minutes to work with it. Maybe not even. Everyone is different. You have to check the manufacturer's instructions. And what I do is I take the bottom of a mat, this is mat head. I took the bottom and I put the putty, and I made sure it went into this area. I stuffed the head, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you, I stuffed the head with paper towels so that the putty wouldn't go too far in. And then so after I did that, I stuffed the clay around the head and let it sit until it hardened. And when it hardened, I wound up with a negative impression of the neck hole and the neck cup and the bottom of the head. So this way I know exactly how to start. I know it's going to fit. Now, like I said before, this neck hole is much smaller than I needed it to be. So I needed to figure out a way to make my first casting out of the polymer clay to have a hole that was big enough so that it would go over that neck bob. So what I did was I looked around, trying to find something that had the same circumference as the neck bob. And what I just happened to find was this hose fitting. It's for a garden hose. You can find something else, a metal pipe, whatever. But what I did is I used some 1/8-inch tape, or any kind of tape that's thin. You can cut down a piece of duct tape if you want. And I wanted to make this a little bit thicker so that this will now sit and stay on that neck bob. You can see the neck bob is now centered inside that hole. And now this circumference, this circumference here is pretty much the same as the neck bob. So the next step was to take some nicely conditioned polymer clay in the color that I'm working with and pack it all around the neck bob, what will be the hole for the neck bob, and down into here, making sure you don't get any air bubbles. Make sure you got that cup inside completely covered. And then I bake it right in the silicone, because silicone can withstand well over 400 degrees. So you only have to do this at 275 degrees, so it's fine. So I bake this whole thing in the oven, and when I'm done, I work this out and pop this out. Sorry, I'm off camera like that. And what you're left with now is a nice impression that has a big hole, neck cup, and the bottom of the chin, so that I can start sculpting off of this. Now, as you can see, this will now fit right over the neck bob, and it will be able to control the neck bob to turn the head and so on and so forth, and you'll be able to start from there. So now that's a simple way of starting a sculpt for a Tonner doll so that you can use this neck bob. How you attach it later on, that'll be another time for another video, but this is the beginning, and this is what I start my sculpt from. So now here's the next hurdle. I need to make a tube that's going to make the inside of this head mostly hollow for attachment later on through the top of the head. Now, as you can see, the chin is lower and the back goes at an angle, and here, and the piece that we got out of the mold follows that same angle. But let me just put this on here so I can show you more easily. If I were to sculpt a tube that went perpendicular out of this hole, it would go too far forward and might interfere with eyes and so on and so forth. So I have to make a tube that slightly leans back so that the ending of it will be up at the top of the head where I want to make the attachment under the wig or whatever, however I'm going to make the attachment. So there has to be a tube that's going to come that kind of leans back off of here and ends at the top of the head instead of that way, which is going to be coming out of the forehead, you know, and that's not what you want. You want to have it leaning back. So before I go any further, what I do, just so you know what this is, this goes into a platform, and this is what I use to finally sculpt the head on. I just got that to the diameter of the hole and put this in my platform, and that's how I sculpt. But that being said, so I have this well-used roll of foil, and you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I just keep using it over and over again. And what I do is I work it into the inside of this neck hole, making sure that it's centered front this way, and I make sure that I lean it back so that, see, it even has to go even further than that. That's too far forward, so I would lean it back even more. So now when I sculpt a clay tube around this piece of foil, the hole will come out the top of the head, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. So now what I'll do is I will use some Bacon Bond, put it on here, and sculpt a clay tube around this, probably only about, let's see, probably only about to the height of his eyes, like around here, to start my sculpt. Well, maybe even further, maybe up to here, because I want to have a little bit of a bulk of solid clay up here that I can drill through later. But that's another story. So we're going to make a tube that goes about to here, and then I'll be back. So this is exactly what I was getting at. Here's the head. Let's see if we can't get this a little bit better. Here's the head, and here is the chin lined up, and you see how that clay tube is leaning towards the back, and it's clearing the eyes, clearing all the facial features, and that will come out right here on top of the head. So that's what I was getting at. Now off to bake.
Woo! Holy smokes.
So now it's all baked, and you may find that some clay got in here, and the walls might be a lot very rough. There's also a suggestion if you can find a tube, a metal tube or something, a wooden tube, rather than the foil that you can put through the hole and sculpt this around. That can also work. Just be sure, I guess I didn't mention it before, I'm sorry, use a release. I have 200, it's called 200 mold release, but Vaseline, something like that, just put it on there so that the foil will come out. That was important and I forgot, I'm sorry. So if you find roughness in there that you want to even out, what I do is I have a million brushes, so this has got a nice taper on it, and I get some sandpaper, pretty coarse, and roll it on there, and then just shove it in there and just keep turning and turning and turning and turning and turning from both sides until you get it as smooth as you want it to be. Now just be careful not to make this hole any bigger than it was. You don't want any rattling. So just keep doing that until you've got the inside as smooth. It doesn't have to be tremendously smooth. It's not, just as long as it's an opening for how we're going to attach the head later. So that's basically how you finish off this piece, and now we can get to start sculpting. Bye. Hope that helped. My sculpting for doing heads, my clay of choice is polymer clay called Pro Sculpt. I will put a link for this in the description. And a little tip, always to keep your hands, so use alcohol to clean your hands, then use some scrap clay and roll it in your hands, roll it around your fingernails, roll it everywhere, roll it on your work surface, because this stuff picks up every little thing you possibly can imagine, every little speck. Roll it around and it should clean up everything very well. Another tip I found out, don't wear anything dark or black. Wear white when you're sculpting. Otherwise those little minuscule pieces of lint will find their way into your sculpt. Save yourself a lot of heartache.
So now we're ready, and I use Sculpey Bacon Bond, and I brush that onto the front surface of the cured clay. Bacon Bond, if you don't know, creates a unbreakable bond between cured and uncured clay. They become one, and also helps it to stick. It's more or less like a glue, but it does fire into a polymer. I'm just brushing it onto the front of the skull, of the core hole, because I'm only going to be working on the front of the face right now. Actually, I'm just going to be blocking it in. It's not, we're at the very, very beginning, so I'm just trying to get it started, and it will be quite unattractive as we go from here. So this is my reference sheet with all of red lines showing all my references for distances, and if you hold that up there, you can see where the core is going to fall in the head that I'm sculpting. If you notice, I pulled away and I carved some of the bottom of that neck ring that I made because it was just too big. It would have interfered with the sculpture. So now it will fit nicely with a lot of clay in front of it when I go to sculpt onto it. It's going to be kind of hard for you to see what I'm seeing because I'm holding the paper kind of at an angle so I can see it where my head is in relation to the camera. But you get the idea. I just keep checking. There I just noticed that I wasn't centered, so now I reapplied it. And make sure you press very, very hard. Can't be any air bubbles. The worst thing you can do is after you do all this work, throw it in the oven and then have something crack and open on the front of it because there was an air bubble. I smoothed that down to the existing neck ring, and eventually clay will work its way into that ring, but you need to constantly be aware of that and take it out as you go along. Also the top of the tube, the same thing will happen. This is my favorite dental tool. I use it almost exclusively along with a wooden paddle type. Most of these are available. You can get sets of them fairly inexpensively on Amazon. Just Google dental tools or search for them on Amazon. Stainless steel. The Bacon Bond also helps you blend those edges onto the cured clay. Like I said, I'm just blocking it in at this point. I just want to get the general amount of clay on there that I'm going to need to proceed with the sculpt. Those red lines you see on the picture are marks that I'm going to be using a divider when I get down to the nitty-gritty, and even in the very beginning, just to mark out placement of things. And these are those almighty dividers. I use them constantly during the sculpt. Here I'm trying to determine the distance between his eyes at the pupils, and then I'll use the sideway swipe to see where the eye would be on that head that I've just started, and determined it would be around there. And then I put in those two holes and draw a line between them at the eye line. Now these marks are going to be covered over time and time and time again, but it just helps to have references when you're adding and deleting clay. Now I'm measuring from his pupil to the bottom of his nose. And then from the bottom of his nose to the middle of his mouth. And then from the middle of his mouth to his chin. Now, there's not enough clay. You'll see when I put the divider there, there's not enough clay there, but this is how I determine where and to add clay, but that will be done later.
Well, I'm going to stop for today. As you can see, I just kind of am blocking him in, trying to follow my guidelines on this picture, using my almighty divider. We're nowhere near close. This is the beginning. He looks ugly, ugly, ugly. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some 6mm clay balls for his eyeballs, and I'm going to bake them and insert them into this model in the right place and go from there. But for today, that's it for me.